This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.
Hello and welcome back to this another lesson on learning to use the Greek New Testament. Believe it or not, we're coming closer and closer to the end, and we only have a few lessons left before we wrap up part 2 on the basics, and then we'll be moving on, of course, to part 3 on learning to use some of the tools that will help you in utilizing the Greek New Testament even more effectively. Today we're going to talk about third declension nouns. And as we begin this lesson, I want to share with you a verse that you'll now see on the screen from Romans, the 5th chapter. Notice what it says. Therefore, being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom also we have access by faith into this grace, wherein we stand and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. Now notice on the screen that there are 3 different words that have been highlighted from Romans 5, 1 and 2. They are the words faith, grace, and hope. Now all 3 of those words are words that come from the third declension. The third declension. And so you can see right away that as a part of these third declension nouns, we have some very, very important theological words. Very, very important words that we use in our vocabulary when preaching and teaching to others. Well, what do we mean by the third declension? If you'll remember, first of all, what a noun is, that it's a person, place, or thing. It's a part of speech, right? And that in Greek, these nouns have case endings that allow us to determine how that noun is functioning in the sentence relative to the other words that are in that sentence. Remember that we have said there are 5 noun case endings in Greek: nominative, genitive, dative, singular, or dative, and accusative, and then vocative. So 5 case endings. And remember that if a noun has a case ending that's in the nominative case, then that noun is functioning as the subject of the sentence. If it's in the genitive case, it shows possession. If it's in the dative case, it's the indirect object. And if it is in the accusative case, then it's showing that it is the direct object. And if it's in the vocative case, then it's in the case of direct address. Okay? Now, so remember that case then refers to how a noun functions in the sentence, and there are case endings relative to a particular noun. We have studied so far the first and second declension noun endings. Now we're going to talk about an entirely different group of nouns that are classified as third declension noun endings. And so to help better understand what we're talking about, I want us to spend just a moment going to the board and looking at a few words. If you were to take all of the nouns, in the Greek language and begin to sort them on the basis of how their stem ends, you would begin to see some patterns emerging. You would see, for example, words like logos, apostolos, theos, and anthropos. You would see that these words end in an omicron, because technically our noun case ending is sigma for the nominative case, and that you have this omicron that seems to be repeated over and over and over again. Now, those noun endings, those words, and these are just a sampling of the kinds of words that have that omicron ending, are words that are part of what we have identified as the second declension. And when these words change in their form to demonstrate or to reveal a different way that it's functioning in the sentence, we use these noun endings right here. Os, ou, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. Now just a word of information here. When we learn these endings, os, ou, o, on, we need to remember that technically the omicron is not a part of the noun case ending. It's actually a part of the stem, okay? And that our actual noun case ending is sigma, upsilon, and then actually iota, because the omicron gets lengthened to an omega, and nu, and then iota, nu, and the omicron gets lengthened here to an omega, and so forth. So these are actually our noun endings right here. but we learn them because they're easier to pronounce with the omicron as os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. So here are second declension noun endings. Okay. Then remember we said that there are a whole group of words that have an alpha or an eta ending their particular stem. Okay. So cardia, martia, agape, and graphe are words with either an alpha or an eta, and we sort of group them together, and we can notice that when they change in their form to indicate how the noun is functioning in a sentence, they follow this pattern. And technically we don't even have an ending, really. Sigma is technically your ending, iota is technically your ending, and nu is technically your ending, and here as well, and nu, and then you see, looks very similar to what we've done over here, but we learn them with those vowel sounds in them to help pronounce them. As, on, because it would be hard to just say nothing. S, I, n. You see, that'd be kind of hard to say. I, n, is. So we just learn them with their particular vowel endings, the stem endings here. A, as, a, on, I, on, I, sas. All right, so words whose stem ends in an alpha or an eta follow this pattern with regard to demonstrating for us how that noun is functioning in a sentence. Okay, this is known as the first declension noun ending. And a declension, again, is just simply a grouping of how words are declined on the basis of how they function in a sentence. Well, if you were then to look at the rest of the nouns in the Greek language, you would see that there are a variety of noun endings as far as the stem endings go and the letters at the end. The third declension takes care of all the rest of all of the nouns whose stem ends in something other than an omicron or an alpha or an eta. Okay? So all the nouns, again, that end in something other than an omicron or an alpha or an eta are going to be put together. And there are some patterns that emerge out of those words that indicate to us how the nouns of those particular groupings are functioning in a sentence. Okay? And so what we want to do now is to learn some of those noun endings. Now they vary, and again there are a lot of consonant endings, and there are other vowels that end up ending the word that we're talking about. And so again there are a variety of patterns, but there is one particular pattern that emerges that I think if you'll learn this pattern, then you'll have a pretty good handle on the third declension noun endings. Okay? And let's take a look at it now on the screen. Now, these are the words that, again, that a lot of teachers will have you memorize, because if you can see a particular pattern here, or get that pattern, these words, this paradigm in your head, then that'll help you to know those noun case endings for the third declension. So here they are: archon, archantos, archanti, archanta, archantes, archantone, archusen, and archantos. Now those words are words also, those that rather they're endings, are words that are endings that we're going to see in regard to participles. So it serves as sort of a dual purpose for you to learn those. Okay, now let's go to the board and notice that same paradigm up here on the board, and notice that it is a little bit different from the endings we learned from the second, third, or first and second declension. Here is our word archon, but I want you to notice that actually our stem ends in this tau. Okay, here's our tau basically that ends our stem. Now, part of the problem that we run into is figuring out exactly what the stem is. Because if you'll remember, when regarding words that end in an omicron, the stem was an omicron, and we just simply added a sigma, and if we remove that sigma, we know what our stem is. However, with third declension endings, when we go to the nominative case now, that's what these are: nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative, right? Singular and plural. We don't have an ending, okay? And sometimes the ending is just sigma. Okay, but in the genitive singular. Our ending is actually os, and so if we remove that os, we know that this is our basic stem here, okay? That's our basic stem. The reason that it creates a problem for the nominative case is this. If you look at the word sarx, for example, okay, here is the nominative case ending, sarx, nominative genitive, and that means flesh. That's the word for flesh. And if you simply added on a sigma, okay, which, right, similar to second declension noun endings, a sigma is going to be our nominative case ending. When that kappa and that sigma meet up together, it forms the x sound. And instead of writing kappa sigma, it just makes this c sound right here, and that's the letter we end up getting, okay? So you may not be able to tell then what the stem is. But if you went to the genitive form of this word, sarkos, then you would see here is my genitive singular ending, and I could just remove that and know that sark then is my actual stem, okay, is my actual stem. So do you have to be worried about and concerned about all that? Not unless you want to get into the details of being able to write it out yourself and understand all the nuances of what happens when those words go to different cases. But for now, what you just need to concern yourself with is learning this little paradigm right here. If you can learn archon, archontos, archonti, archonta, archontes, archonton, archusin, archontos, and sort of get that into your mind as far as your paradigm is concerned for third declension nouns, then it'll be a lot easier when it comes to when you run across a third declension noun in a sentence to know how it's functioning in that sentence. Now, again, if you've looked at your book, you will notice that in your textbook that isn't always regular, that with regard to some other nouns that end in particular vowels or other consonants, that there are some irregularities in comparison to this one. Don't worry about memorizing all of those. Okay, I'm going to show you in just a moment how that really there are a lot of similarities between all of the declensions. But even if you had trouble with those third declension noun endings, one of the exciting things about the third declension noun endings, as well as the second and the first, is that all of the articles that accompany the nouns stay the same. That's why it is so important, I think, to remember those, to memorize those articles and how that article is declined in all three cases. In all four cases, in all three genders, right? And then singular and plural. Because if you can get that down, even though you may not remember that noun ending for the third declension, you'll see that article, and that'll help you to know how it's functioning in a sentence. For example, let's go back to the board and I'll show you what I mean. If you look at this sentence, humes, este, ta, phos, tu, kuriou, right? And that's from your textbook. Humes, right, is our personal pronoun, nominative case, humes, hemon, hemin, hemas, humes, you are, and then here is our to be verb, so it's just further stressed, right? You are, and then to or ta, phos. Now, phos is a third declension noun, okay? And it is actually nominative case. Remember, you would learn that vocabulary word, phos. It's nominative singular. And you say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't look like a noun ending to me. And well, it doesn't now, maybe because you're just learning it, and it's not like the first and second declension noun endings. But when you see this right here, we know that that is, in fact, neuter, nominative case, singular. It could be accusative, that could be accusative, but the context of the sentence, plus the fact that this is not accusative, is telling you that this is our noun in the sentence, okay? So even if, let's say you were coming across the word and you knew something about that word, that sounds like phos, photos, light, so forth, but you saw this, but you didn't know how it was functioning in the sentence, and you weren't sure of its noun ending, you could see this right here that's saying, I am a noun. That's a noun indicator, right? It's a noun article. And it's telling you this, and this was telling you how it's functioning in the sentence. And then, of course, we know tu kuriou is genitive singular of the Lord. So you are the light, and that should have been, cosmos. You are the light of the world, cosmu. So pay attention to those articles. That will help you. Now let's notice these third declension noun endings in comparison to the first and second declension noun endings. And what I'd like for us to do is to see their similarities as well as their differences. Notice how the chart is laid out. We have first and second declension noun endings all grouped together here. Here's our singular endings for the masculine, feminine, and neuter. Here are the plural endings for the masculine, feminine, and neuter as well. And then over here you have the third declension noun endings, masculine, feminine, grouped together in this column, singular, plural, and neuter, singular, and plural. Okay? Now, remember that we had learned these as os, u, o, on, but we had noted that technically the omicron is a part of the stem and not necessarily a part of the ending. And so your actual literal endings are sigma, upsilon, iota, nu for your case endings, and then an iota, on, and then iota sigma and upsilon sigma for your endings in the second declension nouns, as well as your first declension noun endings. Okay, so I'm sorry, for the second declension noun endings here. Now notice in the feminine, okay, you have basically no ending, and then a sigma, an iota, a nu, and an iota, and so forth. Now one of the things I want you to notice first of all is that on is genitive plural, correct? And it's on all the way across. In all three declensions, the genitive plural ending is the same. It's just as regular as it can be, and it's like that in regard to the articles as well. Notice also that just like in the masculine singular, we have a sigma ending. We also, in our third declensions, will have quite often a sigma ending, and sometimes there won't be anything. That's what that dash indicates there. There won't be anything. And by the way, all of this comes from the Basics of Biblical Greek by William Mounts. In his good textbook, there is this master case ending chart. So notice these endings here are very similar to the same endings. Okay. Now notice also that in our dative case, you have an iota ending all the way across. Now sometimes this iota, what ends up happening in regard to the masculine of the second declension noun endings, it gets subscripted, because when it comes up next to a vowel, like an omicron, that omicron gets lengthened, right? There would have been an omicron here. It gets lengthened to an omega, and the iota runs underneath the omega, as it were. Okay? But what you're going to see in third declension noun endings is that in reference to it connecting with a consonant, it's going to stay on that line. And so then you can see the nous are just as regular as they can be across. With on occasions you have an alpha and so forth. So there are a lot of similarities as far as the case endings are concerned. Okay, you can see, for example, the neuter in these first and second declension noun endings as far as the nominative, accusative, and the nominative are alpha, and you come over here to third declension, alpha and alpha as well. So if you wanted to memorize this chart, it would be perhaps a shortcut to knowing all of the case endings. Now, one thing really important that I want to stress, and I want you to pay close attention to this now, and that is, as far as meaning is concerned, there is no difference between third declension and first and second declension. So in other words, if you find a noun with a masculine ending of the first and second declension, or the second declension with a sigma ending, nominative case, it's the subject of your sentence. If you find a noun, a third declension noun with that ending on it, it's still the subject of your sentence. So it doesn't change the meaning. It's just a matter of the particular pattern that's used, the form that's used, to indicate to you that that noun is functioning as a subject, or in showing possession, or as the indirect object, or as the direct object. Okay? So just wanted to make sure you understand there's no difference between the third declension and first and second declension noun endings in terms of how you would translate those in regard to their function in the sentence. They are all the same. It's just, again, a matter of that with certain nouns whose stem ends in various consonants and other vowels other than the omicron and the eta, that all of these follow this pattern. Okay? But again, you see some similar patterns between the two. So I wanted to call that to your attention and just to let you see how closely related all these are And we have now covered basically all three declensions. First, second, and third declension. There are no other declensions in the omega conjugation. We've covered them all. So a great task has been accomplished, and a lot has been learned to this point. Now what I'd like for us to do is to see these third declension nouns in action as we begin to translate some sentences together. So let's go to the board now and work on some of those sentences. All right, this first sentence up here on the board, let's read it. Ha logos sarx agenita. Now, we know this right away is the word, okay? Nominative case endings, os, u, o, on, that tells me it's the subject of the sentence. Now I got to have a verb. Every sentence has got to have a verb. So here it is, agenita. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from the word genomai, okay? And you can begin to see that it is a deponent, and middle or passive in form, but active in meaning. But yet it is agenita, okay? That epsilon there is telling me it's past tense, and that these second aorist verbs are going to use the imperfect endings, so thus indicating it's basically just an aorist, okay, basically just aorist. So there's our verb, and it just simply means became, okay, so it means became. All right, so there's our verb, the word became. Now what do we do with this? All right, it's the word sarx, and if we had worked on remembering that sarx is the nominative case ending, and if you in your vocabulary, if you had worked on those words and remembered sarx, and then sarkos is the genitive form, okay, we would have known that's nominative case. That was nominative case. And you say, well, how does that work in the sentence if this is nominative case and this is nominative case? Well, what ends up happening here is that this becomes a predicate nominative, okay, and just like, for example, in the very first sentence of John chapter 1:1, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, okay, that you end up having theos, ein. It should have been logos there, excuse me, let me erase that. Get that up here real quick. Logos, okay, ha logos, ein, and then it was theos, okay. So the Word was God. And then what you'll notice here is that is a nominative case ending, nominative case. Here's our to be verb. And so the Word was God. And so essentially what's being said is what the Word is, God is, and what God is, the Word is. These nominative case endings are tying it in together. It's a predicate nominative. Okay, the predicate of it is in the nominative case in that regard. It's the subject of our sentence. Very interesting theological concept there that we may talk about at some other point. Well, what's happening here is the same thing. Okay, this is nominative case, nominative case. What the Word is, that Word became flesh. All right, and so the flesh became the Word in that regard. So the Word became flesh is our first sentence. All right, tutu, esti, ta, soma, mu. Okay, tutu, that's our demonstrative pronoun. This is, right, there's our to be verb, esti, and then you have ta, soma, mu. Now here is our lesson from this particular chapter. Soma is the third declension noun, all right? You come on and you go, well, ma, what is that? I don't remember that ending, and that's not, os, u, o, on, or on, ois, us, but it does look like a particular noun ending, okay, that I knew from the neuter, okay, aas, on, it does look something like that. If you're not sure, well, here's that article that's telling you right here, okay, and in fact, this is neuter, okay, and it's the subject of our sentence. It's neuter nominative, all right, and singular, and then here is a personal pronoun, mu, ego, and mu, are just ego, mu, and then if it would have had the emphatic form, it would have been the epsilon in front of it, but it just means of me, right? Okay, of me. So this is the body of me, or this is my body, as Jesus would have said in regard to partaking of the Lord's Supper. Third declension noun. Here is that article that we recognize that clues us in to that it is nominative. You say, well, it could be accusative, but the context of the sentence wouldn't allow it to be so, especially with this to be verb the way it is. Okay? All right, well, let's go down and take a look at sentence number 3 here, or the next sentence here. All right, now this sentence, uk ekomen elpida hati u pistuomen into kurio. Well, we know this means not. Okay, ekomen is our verb here and becomes then the subject of our sentence. So we have, but this is negating that, so we do not have. What don't we have? Well, we got to have an object. We don't have something. What don't we have? Well, what's this? All right, this is our word for hope, elpis, but it follows, if you went down and followed the feminine forms, okay, you would notice that on those feminine nouns ending in the accusative case, you have that alpha ending. All right, now remember the paradigm I had you remember. Archon, archantos, archanti, archanta. Okay? Archanta, hear that ending? Archon, archantos, archanti, archanta. And so here it is right here. Archanta, accusative, singular. All right? So we do not have hope. All right? And then we know hati is our coordinating conjunction because, and then another negation, pistuomen, we, right? This means we believe. That's actually present tense, but it's saying we do not believe. All right, in ta kurio, the Lord, which you know is a prepositional phrase with those dative case endings there. All right, well, let's go back here now and look at this next sentence. All right, so next sentence, eso, themen, te, kariti, dia pisteos. All right. Right here is our verb. You can see that right away. Recognize our verb endings there, and if you do your detective work on here, you can say, well, is this epsilon, is that part of the word, or is that my time morph? Well, that's my time morph telling me past tense. Sozo is the word for save here. I look at they, there's my morpheme for passive, and then my personal ending. So we, not that we were saving anybody, but rather because it's passive, we were being saved, but simply this is themen, is simple aorist passive, okay? So if you were to parse that, it would be first person plural, aorist passive indicative, and it would mean then basically we were saved, okay? We were saved, and then look, here is our dative case. Now, here's going to be the dative of instrument being used here in this particular instance. This is what we were saved by. What were we saved by? Grace, okay? There's our word charis for grace. And if you remember, even if you didn't have the article, archon, archantos, archanti, okay? Archanti, archanta is accusative. This is dative, though, archanti. Now remember we said that as far as the noun declension endings in the dative singular, how that iota subscript under the omega, os, u, o, and then it had the iota subscript was sort of a dative indicator for you. Well, here it is right there, just like in the article, the dative singular article here, the iota is there. And what happens is that because that iota, if it had been placed here up against a vowel, what it wants to do is perhaps lengthen that and then comes down under here. And I used to tell the students a lot that what happens is that when it meets up with another vowel, because it lengthens that vowel, it gets scared, is frightened, and it runs underneath, you know. And so maybe that's a way you can help remember that as well. It runs underneath here. But here, since it meets up with a consonant, it doesn't lengthen that, it stays on the line. It's not afraid of consonants, okay, so it stays on the line. So, but it's nevertheless, there it is, there's our ending. So we were saved by grace, okay, and then dia, our preposition, through, and here's our word for faith, okay, we were saved through faith. The dia requires the genitive, and so what we have here is the genitive form, okay. All right, well, let's go on to the next one. Ukete, genoskamen, tan, kristan, kata, tain, sarka. All right, ukete is no longer, okay, you can even see the uk in there meaning no, all right, but no longer, and then here's our verb, genoskamen, simply present tense, first person plural, present active indicative, right? So we know, but no longer do we know. What is it that we no longer know? Well, remember the accusative case, direct object, answers that question. No longer do we know the Christ, okay? As on, Okay, aos, on. Now, no longer do we know Christ, and then kata can have the meaning of according to, and then the flesh, according to the flesh. And so, ain, accusative plural, okay, accusative singular, and then sarka, from sarx, flesh. So if you remember archon, archentos, archenti, archenta, hear that ending, accusative, and of course it agrees with our article here in gender, case, and number. So, no longer do we know the Lord according to the flesh. All right, well, let's take a look then at this next sentence here. All right, ta, tekna, elaben, agatha, apa, tes, metras, auton. Now, this is our word for the children, okay? So the children, plural. Elaben, all right, here's our stem changer. And second aorist verb, right, from, that may not look like it, but it's actually from lambano, an on, S-N, amineti on, N is what we have to have on the third person to agree with our neuter here on the children. So anyway, the children received, and then agatha. Now remember, this is an adjective, though, that is going to be nominalized in a way, or used as a substantive, I should say, used as a noun. So the children received good things, is what how we're going to translate that. Apa, from, and then here is the lesson from this chapter. Tes, metras, auton. Okay, well, metras is from mater, for meaning mother. All right, remember matriarch has reference to mother rule, but here it is in its genitive form ending, okay? And remember, our articles have to agree in gender, case, and number. We know that tes is our genitive article, and so genitive singular, and so metras, mother, of them, okay? So the children received good things from their mother, okay? From their mother. That's how that would be translated, all right? So don't get confused. Os ending, though, for masculine nouns in the second declension is our subject of our sentence. But mater is a third declension noun, and so it doesn't follow that particular paradigm ending, but this article helps clue you into what is actually the case. All right, let's go to the last sentence here now. En te anastase hoi hagioi exousi, zoane, kai, erenein. All right. Well, we know our preposition, in, all right, and then te anastase. Now, that te right there is telling me this is dative, right? This is a dative article. And, of course, in, the preposition in, does require the dative case. This is our word for resurrection, anastasis, right? So here we have a particular ending. We still see that iota ending there, okay, that's cluing us into it's a dative case. Now, interestingly enough, anastase does not follow exactly the archon pattern, archon, archentos, archenti, archenta, okay? It follows a little different pattern that has to do with the pattern that police follows, and you'll notice that in your book. The nominative, genitive, and the dative are the same. The accusative and the singular and plural are different from that form that archon follows. But still, even though it follows a little different pattern, okay, the dative is still right there, just shining away, telling you I'm dative, and here it is saying I'm dative. So in the resurrection, that's all. You know, just because it's the third declension doesn't change anything about it. It's just its form is a little different on the end there, still telling you it's dative. So in the resurrection, and then the holy ones, or the saints, right, ex usi, and this is actually future, will, and from echo means have, right? If you remember echo, but when we go to the future, we had that sigma sound, and so because of that, the key and the sigma together make this C sound. So exousi, there it is. You can hear it if you say it. Will have, and then life and peace. Zoe is the word for life. It's a first declension noun. Ain, accusative. This is what they have. life, and eirene, same thing, accusative, life and peace. Okay, well maybe that'll give you some idea then of how these third declension nouns work. Nothing really, it's not anything different syntactically as far as how the words work together and all that. It's just a matter of recognizing their forms and becoming more accustomed to them. Well, that's going to end the lesson today, except I just want to call your attention now to our homework, and here's what I'd like for you to do is to continue to work on the vocabulary words that we have learned, that you learned from this chapter in our previous lesson. Read chapters 18 and 19 because we're going to cover those soon, and then I want you to practice translating sentences of your choosing, just to go through here and try to work on these, see how you do as you go along. Well, it's been a real joy being with you again today. And I appreciate so much your dedication, because I know that if you've made it this far in the class, then you're really sticking to it, you're working through it, and that you're a very dedicated person, and you're to be commended for your efforts. So keep working on it, because the payoffs are great when it comes to really being able to preach and teach and dig down deep into that Greek New Testament for those wonderful jewels, those wonderful pearls of wisdom and knowledge that are to be found in the Greek New Testament. All right, well, until next time, I bid you a very pleasant good day. May God bless you and keep you always. And so until next time, goodbye.